CEO and co-founder of Unbound, a rebellious sexual wellness company that makes vibrators, lubricants, and accessories. After receiving a cancer diagnosis at 21 that resulted in early onset menopause, Carli found herself shopping for a vibrator, only to find that the best option was a Hustler Hollywood next to the St. Louis airport. Okay, enough said. So she was inspired to build a company. There's so much more to say about Carli, but this is what I love, like if you could get this title. Today the company has been hailed by the New York Times as the, this is a quote, ideological center of the tech-savvy, female-led women's sexuality movement. Like, what's better than that?
Hey.
So thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Next we have Carli Sapir, who's the founding partner of Amboy Street Ventures. It's the world's first capital fund focused on sexual health and women's health technology startups. Carli has a lot of experience as an angel investor. She's a creator of an investing platform that enables investors to find female-founded businesses. And Amboy has made a number of significant investments in the space in a very short period of time. So they're off to the races. And last but not least, Jackie Rotman, maybe you've seen her in the paper recently, founder and CEO of Center for Intimacy Justice, which is an organization that is currently working to catalyze the market for women's sexual health and wellness by rewriting corporate advertising policies. We've heard Meta mentioned a few times, so that will come up a lot. She recently released a report on how deep and severe this problem is that's gotten incredible pickup, including the New York Times, and there's been some interest by some other interesting people, which she will share with you. So I feel like we have the A-team to talk about this. So just want to set some historical perspective, certainly as the old lady on this panel, and someone who's been in women's health for a long time. This isn't new. I first encountered this in 2009 when the company I was running, we had our ads rejected from 95 advertising platforms out of 100. Cable, website, radio, TV. I think the guy who was enforcing the algorithm in women's health might have been out sick for a week because we were on Facebook for a week and then they realized we were there and shut down again. Of course, we can never reach a human being again. But this is a chronic condition, speaking of women's health. So, Carli, you've had so many interesting experiences, building your business, fundraising, being a voice in the space. What's keeping you motivated to stay in there? I mean, you've obviously made progress and you've raised money, but it's a slog a lot of the time.
Yeah, and you met me in the very beginning when we were trying to fundraise and no one would meet with us. And I remember you telling me this really poignant story about putting a $100 bill on the table to try to get everyone to admit that we have to at least be able in this pitch to say the word vagina, labia, clitoris, like all these things, because investors were like, and I think that it's come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. It's incredible to see how much VC funding is now starting to go into these startups, Unbound included. It took me 2.5 years to raise our seed round. I had 309 no's before I got my first yes. But then, once I got my first yes, our round was oversubscribed in 2.5 weeks, which tells me one thing and one thing only. People are so scared to just be the first mover, but there's so much opportunity in doing that because the demand is there, the consumer wants it, and the entrepreneurs that are now filling the space are the female, femme, non-binary people that are experiencing these problems, whereas historically it was predominantly cis white men. No offense to any in the room, but I think that the founders in any venture that are the most qualified to solve a problem are those that personally experience it. So I'm just really motivated to be here and to hear everyone's stories because everyone here is working on something that is interesting and progressive and changing the narrative.
So Carli also is one of the co-founders of Women of Sex Tech, and they had organized a rally in New York right near Facebook headquarters. And I've never been to a rally, and I'm thinking, like, what do you even wear to a rally? What do you do at a rally? And I had just watched Brene Brown, and one of the lines that I took away from the Netflix show was, if you don't feel uncomfortable, you're not trying hard enough. So I'm driving into the city like, wow, I really feel uncomfortable. This is gonna be great, So lots more to discuss. So, have you made progress? Jackie, you are one of the newer voices in the field. You've done this research, which we'd love to hear about. You identified, I know you'll share some of the highlights, that 60 out of 60 companies that you interviewed all were rejected by Facebook. I don't know anywhere else where stats on anything are 100%.
So talk a little bit about some of the highlights of the study and some of the exciting momentum you've built as a result of the traction you're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. And it's so great to all be here together on this topic. I want to start by sharing this slide. This was last week. So Hillary Clinton just tweeted for the first time that this is being seen by high-level American politicians who are tweeting, putting pressure on Meta about this issue. The past month has been an amazing time. January 11th, the Center for Intimacy Justice, an organization, released a report which many organizations and incredible people were a part of that showed, as Rachel said, that of 60 companies we studied in menopause, pelvic pain, endometriosis, fertility, contraception, abortion care, every single one of those companies was rejected by Facebook. These were some of the pictures, actually. So it's pretty far reaching. There's even a consent education example that's combating rape culture and talking about consent and sexual health. And at the same time, these ads are allowed and have been allowed since the inception of the latest wave of erectile dysfunction companies. So this is the double standard that we're up against. And we believe that this disparity in advertising affects so many areas of our lives. It affects who gets funded. If you cannot advertise on the most important growth channel, you're not going to get follow-on funding to achieve the kind of growth that companies like Roe and Hims are achieving that are crucial to women's health. You're not going to be able to share information with the billions of people that need it about things like endometriosis or vaginal dryness. And you're certainly not going to, with these advertising policies in place, create a culture of women's sexual equality, both when it comes to consent and when it comes to pleasure. So that's why we care so much about this issue at Center for Intimacy Justice. And I feel like women have been working so hard on this. Polly has been in this for 8 years, Rachel since 2008, Carli, similar timing as me. And we have to celebrate these wins because we need that fuel. And I think seeing that senators and former presidential candidates are paying attention to this and are advocating for every entrepreneur who has faced this in the past decades is giving me hope, inspiring me hugely. So the recent recognition in the New York Times and 50 media outlets about these findings that we've all known about and many of you have known about for a long time, but the public and the top of American politics is now paying attention to is a really exciting time, and it's just the beginning.
I'm going to segue from vaginal dryness, which you don't get to do in a lot of meetings. One of the companies that was in your study got rejected. They're a menopause product, and they got rejected because Facebook said that talking about vaginal dryness was too sexual in nature. And so I've just done random informal surveys asking anyone who's ever experienced vaginal dryness if too sexual in nature is anything they use to describe that. So I think it isn't. And one of the physicians made a comment, and Dr. Shaw from Maven was talking about this. When you look at the algorithms, and lots of people in this room know this, when you look at erectile dysfunction, it goes through a family planning algorithm, which is ironic given that it's a product for men 50 plus with cardiovascular issues, and half of the men are using it for performance enhancement. Whereas anything that says anything that might raise the shackles about women's sexuality goes through a different one about pleasure and other things. So if we were talking about a disease, and I've used this expression like our vaginas were falling out of our bodies, then we probably could advertise because then it's a disease. When you do, especially where poly is, if you do anything around pleasure, it's just too terrifying to discuss. So that's why we're glad to have females around the table investing. You've invested before, you've invested in lots of other areas, jumped into this with both feet. So in addition to whether or not you were surprised at what you found, I'd also love you to share one of the fixes or solutions, ideas you've developed that's unique to your fund to help combat this.
Yeah, sure. So let me just start. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for being on this panel with me. and thanks for being here and listening to us talk about this. So I started Female Founded Club, which is an organization to help female founders raise money. And I was particularly interested in companies in sexual health and women's health space because of my own health experiences. I really resonated with them. I was helping them raise money, and it was harder for me to raise money for them than any other industry, like you mentioned. So I would go out and put out my own money into these companies, start angel investing there, and try to bring them to my friends in DC and say, this is a real need. I know there's a demand. You know there's a demand. Let's get money here. And that was a struggle. Not only were these companies struggling with fundraising, a lot of them are also struggling with advertising. So while I was helping them fundraise, I often worked next to this consulting group called the Healthy Pleasure Group. They're based in London, and they help companies with consumer education, branding, marketing, scientific innovation, and I think that they work really well with the companies I was also supporting. So when I had the idea, by the way, it was hard to get VCs in all these deals. It was really easy for me to get my angel network in all these deals. A lot of them were women and understood the problem completely. And so they would start investing alongside of me. And I realized that this could really be a fund rather than us just angel investing together, which is why I started Amboy Street. But I knew that most of our portfolio companies, especially consumer-facing companies, were going to face these advertising issues that we're talking about today. And I knew the Healthy Pleasure Group's already creating the solution to help these companies. They don't only focus on healthy pleasure, they focus on women's health as well. And so I asked them to come in and be consultants to our portfolio companies. And they said they wanted to be a little bit more active with us. So they joined as GPs with us. Not only are they involved in the investment process, but after we invest, they are full on working with our portfolio companies, helping them with this huge issue, which is advertising in our space.
Awesome. So one of the things that lots of companies in this space have had to resort to, for lack of a better word, is PR, which has been spectacularly successful. The only problem is you can't control it. You know, I launched a business the weekend when it used to die, which was sad on a lot of levels, but one of them was that there was no coverage because stuff happens, you can't control it. So Polly, talk a little bit about how you've used PR and the power of your message, and also that your business is based on a personal story to drive growth, attention, funding, even when you can't advertise at the level of investment that you would like to.
Yeah, I think I try to look at it through the lens of like, for every barrier, there's also the flip side, which is a moat. So like, if it's really difficult to advertise, conversely, and this is from a capitalistic perspective or for-profit business, but if you can garner a following and you can build that audience and community, it's that much harder for like Hims launched vibrators in the last year, and I'm sure no one in this room knows that because they can't advertise either. And so what we did was say, as a brand, say, how do we speak to our consumer in a way that relates to them and enables them to live their values and also support a cause and help amplify this issue, because it's compounded. It's like, I mean, I'm sure everyone in this room knows this, but when you can't advertise, you can't even tell people that you can't advertise. And so we all feel like broken records everywhere we go, because we're like, did you know that you've never seen a vibrator ad or a lubricant ad, most likely, because we're not allowed to. And 9 times out of 10 people are like, really? And so what I decided to do was build community with the Women of Sex Tech, which started as 5 to 7 founders that were facing similar issues, and now is over 250 founders that are all collectively sharing resources and creating PR stunts. So in addition to that community and the protests that we had outside of Facebook, we also, as a brand, did a wildly successful campaign called Vibes for Congress, in which, when Donald Trump was first elected, obviously there was the massive attack on Planned Parenthood, trying to close different chapters and locations, and so we decided we were going to allow anyone to buy a vibrator for $15. We would handle the logistics of sending, and then you can pick which congressional member you wanted that to go to. We would ship it to them, and then all the proceeds went to Planned Parenthood. And so, like, as Michael Scott in the office would say, it was a win-win-win, because you're supporting a cause, you're enabling your customer to also live their values, and then we got over 50 different PR mentions. And Mitch McConnell got 750 vibrators. So it was good for everybody. But I think you have to exploit
And
this
you usually
moment.
look so happy on TV.
Right. But it's about kind of being bold and loud and not being afraid to be a little controversial, because I think that's the only way we're going to get these issues out to where the public is more aware of the barriers that we all face and thus limiting, you know, the advancement overall of the industry.
So we saw the progress. Hillary Clinton's on this now. We're confident. So what are you hoping to do? And you've gotten a lot of media coverage. The report is great. People are talking about it. How do you go from here to maybe dismantling sexist policies? How do you actually go so far as to change policies at Facebook when lots of companies have been trying to do this for a long time and they're able to, you know, fend them off? Is there a movement? Is there, you know, there's strength in numbers? How do we do this now that you've given them the data, which we've all known was true, to make real change?
Well, the time is now for all of that. We've now heard from over 150 businesses that are affected by this. By the way, of the 60 companies in our report, 59 of them were founded and led by women, and one was founded and led by a non-binary person. So this is also about economic creation for people who have, you know, for women and people that have been blocked from economic power. So we're now in touch with over 100 businesses, investors that need this to change for their investments and for female-led founded funds to be successful. And we're also working with legal and legislative partners. And so the next step is really to systematize a system where all of these different voices can be convened in actions that can dismantle this. We were speaking on Monday with multiple Senate staffers in Senator Patty Murray's office, who chairs the Senate Health Committee. The call was, we reached out like 5 p.m. on a Friday, and we're on the phone on Monday. And Facebook has been having to answer to them because the Senate Health Committee has taken this on, which is, again, the first time that we've had. Yeah, and I think it's meaningful to see so many entrepreneurs that have been working on this. This is painful. This is not just, like, this is, when you're blocked from this, it's difficult on so many levels, and I think so many people feel seen and feel like, wow, we could actually change this. And this thing that had so many people have become sensitized to getting these kinds of ads blocked, people are realizing this is not normal, this is wrong, this needs to change, which we knew, but I think there's even more excitement. So what we've been doing, the report is just the beginning. We've spent about a year looking at several different policy and legal routes. We've talked to the best lawyers in the US across several different areas and looked at 5 legal approaches. The 2 that are most likely is we've drafted a legal complaint to the Federal Trade Commission for unfair and deceptive advertising to call on the FTC to sue Facebook and regulate Facebook on this.
Oh, well,
So that's been with the Harvard Cyber Law Clinic, and people in this room, Elizabeth Bailey made that introduction with a panel that you were on at South by Southwest. So we've written an FTC complaint. We're beginning to talk with not just the Health Committee, but the Commerce Committee to get Congress to put action behind that. But we've also looked at 3 other routes. The shareholder activists, and especially the feminist shareholder activists, want to put pressure at shareholders on Facebook. We've looked at litigation and other routes. So essentially, CIJ has been doing this policy and legal analysis to figure out Facebook seems to be immune to press pressure, unlike many companies. So we actually need to build power in other ways and find policy solutions that have teeth. And so now is a great time because also I would say funding is crucial for this work. It's so long entrepreneurs have been having to do this on top of running their business, and it's clear that it's a big enough problem. We need full-time people and bringing in strategists and lobbyists on the issue, and so that's what this new membership program, which investors and companies can join to be a part of that together, is going to be crucially exciting and impactful for it.
That's awesome, and clearly collaboration is the theme. You mentioned HIMSS and Row. Those are great examples. Those are terrific companies and they're growing and their investors are going to be reaping the benefits, but it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So they get a ton of money, they have more power to change things, they make more money, they buy companies, and so if you start behind the 8 ball, it's really hard to catch up.
Yeah.
And you know, when you get 100, what do they get this week? 150? Row got 150? Yeah. You know, think about You went to 309 to try to get a couple $1 million. Think of all the other things you could have been doing with your time. So, Carli, going back to you, because you and people like Linda at Avestria and the folks at RIA and Portfolio, there's strength in numbers. There's more of us collectively. So there's more entrepreneurs, there's more data, there's more money, there are more individual female investors, lots of celebrities coming into the space. How do you, from your perspective as an investor, contribute to this change? We'll leave it to Jackie to topple Facebook, but how can you make it in the meetings that you're in and in the role that you play with your investors, how can you sort of chip away at this system that is not advantageous to female companies?
Right, so I think like our biggest asset, I think Healthy Pleasure Group is amazing. I think what we can really do is support companies that are making the biggest change. So when we do look at each investment, we think about the change they're making for our industry. One of our first investments, Dame Products, an effective method they just did was sue the MTA for not letting them advertise, and they won, and now they're all over the subways, which is amazing. We also invested in Contraline. We think male contraception is hugely important for just gender equality in general. So it's a huge part of our due diligence process is understanding what these companies are doing, what levers they're pulling, and how they're trying to change our industry. And making sure that we can support them with capital. If we can also make other VCs understand that this industry it's a huge need. Like what the consumers, like you said, Wally, they need these solutions. We all know this in the women's health space. Like personally, I have my own women's health issues. I'm seeing solutions come in just now to the space where I really needed help 7 years ago. So it's getting them up off the ground from the early stages and then letting them flourish with their consumers and their community, like you spoke about as well. And that's what we're hoping to do with capital we have at Amboy Street Ventures.
So the Dame example is another great example. So that was amazing. It was hugely successful. It was 3 years. It was a lot of money that if it had been plowed into advertising might have made a bigger difference. So again, this is all interconnected. So you can't really look at this issue without also looking at the investment piece. So again, I started off by saying we don't want to be gloom and doom. What do you wish you knew then that you know now? So you can maybe save some of the people in the audience from tripping over the same things we all tripped over.
Me?
Go ahead, you start, Carli.
What do I wish I knew then?
Before you started investing in this space that we're all in.
You'll defer to you for now. I'll think on it.
I think just the power of community, and I think in the last 2 years we've all been deprived of that because of COVID and trying to stay safe. But I think one of the things I realized early on is like when you experience these barriers, there's a lot of weird shame where it's like, you can't advertise because you're wrongful, and it kind of it compounds on itself. And so one of the bravest things I did was start to reach out to founders like Alex at Dame or Laura Haddock at Laura DiCarlo or Eva, the founder of Mod. We're all direct competitors, and at first it was terrifying, but we were getting coffees and starting to meet with each other, and we realized that like, yes, we're competitors, but ultimately the biggest competitor is these systemic issues that we're trying to tear down. And I think that that is what is unique to femme and non-binary founders is that willingness to, quote, reach across the aisle and say like, yeah, we're competitors, but we have such a bigger fight with these systemic issues. Wouldn't we benefit from being one unified voice in one community? Which is also why I am immensely grateful. I met Jackie in San Francisco a couple of years ago while trying to fundraise, and I'm just so grateful that she's created the Center for Intimacy Justice because it's a full-time job. Like Women of Sex Tech got so big that I was like, I can't run 2 companies at once. And so, yeah, I just think the power of community is so crucial to enacting change.
Jackie, thoughts on that? Well, you're relatively new, so maybe you don't have any reflections yet.
Well, one is, I need to celebrate this one. She does so much. Holly Rodriguez, I saw for the first time in the New York Times in 2017. It was probably 4 or 5 months after I'd experienced a traumatic assault at Harvard and grad school, and I wanted to work on topics around women's sexual wellness, and I didn't know that there was a movement and a field until I read this article called Women of Sex Tech Unite in the New York Times times that Polly's face was on and had spearheaded by creating the Women of Sex Tech and so many other groups. And that Polly has done, I think that point about competitors reaching across the aisle and working together to push forward a wave that is benefiting so many people. We stand on the shoulders of people from multiple generations that we've never even met that have been paving the way for right now and the fights that we're taking on right now. I mean, talking with Congress about advertising censorship and these new, and having people like Hillary Clinton, I mean, that was so meaningful for us to have that inspiration. So anyway, I'm deeply grateful for Polly, who's one of the first people to fund the CIJ through Unbound and has also just been an amazing advocate. But as far as reflections, what I want to say is that we need to, this work, we have to survive. We have to maintain our own energy because it's a marathon. Sometimes I talk with entrepreneurs that have newly experienced being censored and people will be crying. Like people will be so beat up over it because they're trying to fundraise, they're doing something crucial for women's health and running into this. And when you have those calls, everything feels urgent. Like they're like, please write the New York Times today. And it, like we need to follow up immediately. And the thing is, this has been going on since 2008. This has been going on since 2017. We have to be in this for the long haul, and to do that, we have to resource ourselves. We have to be compassionate with ourselves, and we need strategy and partnership and real movement building, which is what we're working to build, because this is going to take, I was talking with Casey earlier on another investor, and it is going to take so many players to take down such a systemic issue that is algorithmic and cultural and technological. This is going to take all of us in this room, so I'm excited to meet more of you and partner with you because we have a lot of work to do, but we're seeing change.
So, there's so many thoughts going on. Like, there's so much to discuss. This to me is like the best buffet in the whole world. So when you think about this idea, so let's imagine that this letter that goes to Facebook and we topple the FTC and take over the world.
The FTC will be our friend. They'll topple Facebook.
Say that again?
The FTC will topple.
Yes, well, but with your pushing them, you'll be the hands behind it. What would you envision in a world that doesn't look like this? So let's believe that we're going to get to a different place, which I'm very hopeful about, even though it's been so long. And you mentioned something really important that came up a number of times during the past 2 days, which is without education, without vocabulary, we can't even have a conversation. So you start in a space that people are uncomfortable talking about or don't know much about or have been stunted by the cultural background or religious background to think of intimacy only as a way to make a baby. So you start there, and the companies that Carli invests in and the work that Jackie's doing and the work that Polly's doing have come in and played a role around education that the government or the powers that be or whoever is supposed to. Certainly we know we can't get that from sex ed given how that's set up in the US. So you're also taking on the role of creating a vocabulary and changing the conversation. So, fast forward, April 3rd, when the FTC has shut Facebook down, just be optimistic, and Jackie becomes president of the world. What would you think would be the first thing you would do, Polly, specifically for your business, if the shackles were finally off and you didn't have to spend all this time on advocacy and going to 309 investors? What would be among the first things that you do?
I mean, hopefully I'd raise a Series A. And, in all sincerity, like I knew to what you were saying, like I started to go out to raise a Series A and the investor's like, well, if you can't advertise, where are you gonna put the money? And I was like, that's a good point. and so we hit profitability and we've been profitable since 2019, which is great, but we've, kind of like the growth isn't where it should be. And so I think if we were to have access to advertising, then we could go raise a Series A, and then hopefully we could enact change in all these other ways where, vibrators are considered less controversial than an AK-47 in this country. Because let me tell you, I've gotten targeted ads for bump stocks before, and it's crazy that we treat this category as this awful thing because we decouple sexual health from wellness and pleasure. For the vast majority of people with penises, they're one and the same because in order to procreate, you have to orgasm. But for women, femme, and non-binary individuals, we treat them as completely separate entities. And so ideally, raise a Series A, but also I hope that we live in a world in which those two things can be melded together, and one is not considered more offensive than the other.
You can advertise. Are you accelerating the rate at which you build your fund? Are you investing in more companies? What are you doing April 4th? I'm not
Well, just as like from a personal level, the day that female sexual pleasure is no longer shameful will be like that will be such a big win. I think it's insane that that's considered shameful when everyone's having sex. And I know that this is about women's health more broadly. I mean, so I fundraise for my fund as well, and I face issues with investors as well. Last week, I had a family office tell me that they had to go talk to the rabbi to see if they could invest. It wasn't date products that they were worried about. So I was like, oh, date, I understand. They said no, it was contraline, male contraception. They think that it was against their religion. So understand, I think that there's so many different barriers on this industry, not just the shame. And I think it would open up so many doors for people to understand their own bodies, understand each other as humans. And I think honestly it would be a better world. So, I mean, what would I do? Of course, I would go out and raise a bunch more money for a fund, deploy more capital into the companies I believe in. But I think that just from a broader lens, it would be such a big step forward for society.
You just reminded me, literally, going back, we were presented to an angel fund because they seemed to be interested in female health. This was for a couple of different companies. And they said no, they weren't comfortable with sexual pleasure and wellness. And the reason we had gone to them in the first place is because they had an investment in Hooters. So that, I guess, was okay. If we're, however you describe what Hooters does, I don't think it's celebrating women.
Chicken wings, obviously.
Yeah, it was about the chicken wings. But even people, the hypocrisy and the inconsistency is crazy making. I have no idea what time it is. I don't know how you know when you're up here. So I don't know if we're supposed to go to questions or
5 minutes.
5 to so. Okay, so let's go to questions. Go ahead. Thank you.
So this is Brian Wynn from the Male Clinical Trials. Not necessarily a question, more of just sharing a comment here. I'm going to read the email that I got from Meta. Hi Brian, after a review of your male contraceptive clinical trial ad account CCN017, it is now restricted from advertising because of inauthentic behavior or violations of our advertising policies or community standards. This account and any ads that we're running are now disabled. So
Join Center for Intimacy Justice.
Yeah, right with you.
It's pretty amazing.
It's infuriating, and there's no human on the other end of it. So
That's
it's just
exactly right.
shouting into the void. I'm really sorry that happened though.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this happened to you, so I was like, but 50% of the companies we studied had their entire accounts shut down.
Yeah.
And some of them get it back. The more connected you are, and it's like this whole power, historical power building and whatever, the more connected people are, the easier they can get their accounts back. But I talked with a lactation education company that sells simulators to hospitals to teach new parents about breastfeeding. I talked with them in July, and they had been blocked from their entire account since December. Another entrepreneur had been blocked from her whole account for 2 years, lost 10 years of account content. So the other piece of it is getting actually completely blocked, not just having a few ads banned, but being blocked from the most important.
And it also happens, it happens with your email. So we've gone through periods, as I know other companies have, where every email you send gets rejected. So you can't even communicate, let alone advertise. But there was a question over here.
Hi, I'm Audrey with B-Girl, and we work in menstrual health. So the issue of facing stigma in our advertising is very, very real to us, although it's of course different from sexual pleasure. How, given this social business model, it can be tricky, right? You have a for-profit business model, but you're tackling these issues of stigma that are enforced by systemic and structural forces that are huge, and really tackling this public issue at the same time. Polly, how have you navigated this in your strategically approaching the type of marketing that you're doing, how you're able to parse out what you take on in terms of addressing these huge issues. And I'm also curious to hear from the investment side too, how you think about this with investments that have this for-profit business model, but are also at the same time tackling public health issues essentially.
Sure, you mean in terms of what marketing channels we do use or how I allocate my time?
Yes.
Okay, so I think the thing that's great, so here's a fun stat, 1 out of every 3 searches on Google is related to sex. And obviously a lot of that is pornography, so take that for what you will. But there is a massive, like our return on investment for AdWords is, I think, 508%. So people are searching for this information, and I think Google has done a really good job of walking that line of having policies around like age restrictions and who gets shown these ads. But if somebody is putting in body safe, medical grade vibrator, don't they deserve to get search results? And Google has said yes. And so I think they've set a really great precedent for how you can create advertising policies so that, you know, I think Facebook is afraid that some 12-year-old's gonna be scrolling and all of a sudden see, you know, a huge dildo or something. And I think a company that is, you know, worth, I think like $1 trillion market cap, somewhere around there. Well, they lost 250 billion of it the other day, but like if you create an entire business model where you can hyper segment and pinpoint your customer, I would think they'd be able to enact policies that also create safety. But to answer your question, I would say AdWords, content, SEO, like there's so many people that are searching for content, as well as PR, and then native content on social media. So we have a really big following on Instagram and TikTok that it took 8 years to build, but it's completely organic and our engagement is about 5%. So it's all about just meeting people where they are, even though you have to work twice as hard to find them, if that makes sense.
The second part of the question was from an investment perspective.
Yeah, can you repeat from an investment perspective?
Thanks. Yeah, from an investment perspective, how do you think about potential investments that have a for-profit business model but may have even trade-offs because of the social issues and the public health issues that they're tackling?
Yeah, I think we don't shy away from social issues and public issues where some VCs might. We've tried to put a team together in place that can help those companies pass those hurdles as best as we can. And usually, if there is a hurdle, that just means that it's more of an unserved need. So we know that once the company gets past that hurdle, it's going to flourish. And so if we can support them to do that, we feel like we can, then we're not shy to invest there.
Can I have one very quick comment? I just want to say, because this is a very pleasure-forward panel of pleasure activists, just want to make it clear for those that are new to this issue that this is also affecting so many other areas. About 90% of the companies in our research actually have nothing even to do with pleasure and are still banned. And I think people like Carli that are working in the sex tech space have been driving forward change that's benefiting all of the other companies that are blocked, and a lot of leadership has come from Carli's industry, but the issue is far-reaching, even far beyond this, and beyond those of us on this panel.
Important clarification, because you might be able to say, well, I guess pleasure, it's controversial, but it's everything. It's menopause, it's lactation, it's pregnancy, it's, you know, unless it's a disease and someone's finding the cure or coming up with a medical solution, it affects every business.
Yeah, I'd be curious by show of hands, how many people in here have dealt with some type of censorship based on the nature of what you do? Okay, so yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And how many of those people who are raising money have had to go to upwards of 50 investors to raise money? That's a lot of time that could be spent building things and creating solutions. So, over here.
Hi, my name is Sarah Axelson. I'm with Power to Decide, which is a national reproductive health organization dedicated to ensuring that everyone has the power to decide if, when, and under what circumstances to get pregnant and have a child. And part of our work includes running Bedsider, which is the largest online birth control network essentially in the world at this point. I'm particularly curious, given all of the work that you all are doing, which is so amazing, and thank you so much for sharing all of it with us today. As someone who is sitting in this room from a nonprofit organization, what opportunities do we have for public-private partnership to try to address some of these issues and to leverage the reach and the resources and all of the things that nonprofit organizations in this space also bring to the table, because I think there's a lot of potential in those partnerships, but I'd be curious to hear how we might be able to leverage those to address some of these issues that you all are seeing.
I feel like you should take that.
Okay. There are a ton of ways to partner. This issue is going to take leadership in the nonprofit sector. It's taken, also want to shout out to a lot of philanthropists have taken a bet on funding this work for the past year before we had any proof of concept until now. And so it takes the philanthropic sector to fund, risky work. It takes for private companies, investors, and so a lot of the work is around coalition building, and we'd love to work with you and Bedsider, and so we can find ways to partner together. And I'm glad you brought up abortion, because I meant to say this in the beginning. A lot of abortion health information has also been censored by Facebook and Google and others, and I was excited that in the letter that Senator Patty Murray sent to Meta, they spent a whole paragraph specifically talking about abortion. And part of why Senator Patty Murray's office was interested in this was because they were already in talks with Meta and potentially other tech companies, but definitely Meta, about their blocking information around abortion. So these issues are so linked, and it was amazing to see, while our report, it did have abortion in the data, but it emphasized multiple different areas of women's health, but the fact that they were doing that work on abortion lifted up these other health issues, and then this work lifted up the abortion issue. So it's been powerful to see that partnership at this crucially devastating and important time in our American history on abortion rights.
So, and I would also add to that because you have an audience that a lot of these companies want to reach, there's many, many creative and simple ways to do partnerships where a percentage of revenue goes towards your organization and the trade-off is access. There are marketplace collaborations. There are a lot of what you have, in addition to an amazing passion and objective, is you are speaking to people who many of the people in the room have products and options for. And that's really where a for-profit company, in addition to having an aligned mission, that's where you can make it make sense. And so it's a win-win.
Yeah, I was just gonna echo. I was basically gonna say that it's like, if you can't advertise on a mainstream channel, why not go to someone that already has a targeted audience you're hoping to get to, and where you're not censored. So it would definitely be great to connect with you later. But I think like what we're trying to do is figure out those types of channels that help these companies succeed. And so understanding affiliate marketing has been huge among our portfolio companies. So it'd be great to talk later.
And PSI and others have been hugely censored in this too.
So on behalf of this panel and Kasako, thank you so much. I think you can see that the future is in good hands as we try to topple the powers that be. So thank you so much for your participation, your insights, for the questions, and for continuing to shout to the rooftops that this is a problem that we need to solve.